Welcome.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you, Senator.
I will listen with care.
I will try to speak with equal care. Thank you. Hello, good afternoon. Dobry den, dobry den. I will try. What a lively group this is. This is a great group. It is my pleasure to be the speaker introducing this event, a live broadcast on the record event which caps off the Atlantic Council Central Europe Week. This event is sponsored by good friends, Sevro, Jagiello 2000, and Heritage. This Central Europe Week is designed in the official papers. It is said to promote Central Europe relations with the US, but there is much, much more to say. Central Europeans are the co-authors of the best part of the 20th century. The overthrow of communism and the defeat of the designs of Mr. Hitler and Mr. Stalin. And the Central Europeans did it with help, including from my country, but the Central Europeans did it themselves, including in this city. And now we are faced with the return of our old familiar foes in new guises. Aggressive tyrants. And I will say, on the record, including the one in Moscow, making war against Ukraine and threatening aggression against us all. And our task is not done. And that is the underlying theme of one part of Central Europe Week, and the underlying theme, the other part of Central Europe Week, is to remember to rally the democracies, the free world, if I can use the phrase, to stand equal to the moment. We are also challenged from within, all of us. That is what Central Europe Week is about. I've come from Bucharest and from Warsaw, and the discussions have been serious with many questions raised. But I am a believer in transatlantic relations, and I am a believer in the free world. And there are many people here who helped extend the principles of the free world east of the line of Molotov-Ribbentrop, the line of the Iron Curtain. Now that's a hell of a legacy, and it is worth defending. And that's what Central Europe Week is about. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Sasha Vondra, and I feel a bit foolish doing so in Prague, but I will say this. The work of the generation of 1989, the generation of the liberators, looks more and more impressive as we see how much they did. And it is for the next generation and the one after that to rally and defend those accomplishments. But that generation is with us still. I'm part of that generation. Did my part. It was my honor to have tried to contribute. So it is my pleasure to introduce Sasha Vondra and kick off this afternoon's session. So thank you for coming. Thanks to our partners. And thanks, since I am in Prague, thanks to the people of Prague who did so much for so many in this lifetime. Thank you.
Well, hello everybody. Yes, you know, I'm a generation of the late 80s. I don't know, but there is something impressive on me, you know. I'm older. Every day hurts you something, and you have to accommodate to this. But I still have some energy to fight, and also to find for the achievement which, due to the people like Dan Fried and some others who are in the room, Jan Brzezinski, others, help us or even navigate us to do in the last 3 or 4 decades. And we certainly remain very grateful for this. Because the fact how Prague is booming, how the Czechs are becoming more self-confident. That's also thanks to you and your help. So thank you very much for this. Secondly, I was asked by my friends, Sasha, you had a tie today. And David mentioned this too. Yes, I wanted with the suit and tie to underline our gratitude that you are doing this with us and that we are continue to do this. Yeah. So it's a serious business, so it deserves the tie. And thirdly, of course, this is my privilege to welcome you on behalf of Severo, because that's the home of our university, and I'm glad to see the founding father and the president of the university, Ivan Langer, who was my colleague in the government of Mirek Topolánek, the former prime minister, who is here too. Ivan was the Minister of Interior. In fact, the father of achieving one big thing between us, and that was the free visa regime to the US. That was your largest foreign policy achievement, so thank you very much for Ivan. And paradoxically, it was done, as I remember very well, with the help of Heritage Foundation. And 20 years passed since that, or how much. And I noticed in the Twitter community today, and Katerina has sent me this, that there is a group of this bubble in Twitter of those left radical liberals. Now they call themselves liberals. 30 years ago, we were the liberals in the economy in the classic sense of meaning. Now, it's a bit different story. And that they wrote in Twitter, evil organization, Heritage Foundation, ultra conservative Catholic or whatever, is doing a business with Severo. So I was looking forward whether some demonstration would be in front of the building by those people, but they did not show up. But just to illustrate, Heritage Foundation, which I remember is one of the best think tanks in the US. Of course, it was always in the right. It was always more on the realpolitik ground of doing the things than, for example, American Enterprise Institute or whoever else. But normal, legitimate, and useful part of the US think tank community. So we are grateful to Jim Carafano, who is here from Heritage, and we'll see him pretty soon for working together. We are proud of that. And then my few remarks about the subject. The world is changing, no doubts about it. It's a dynamic development. It's marked by the redistribution of power and influence in the global scene. I have no doubts that we are shifting from a unipolar to multipolar world. That's a matter of structural change. We may like it, we may dislike it, but that's a matter of reality. And it's a paradox that I remember 20, 30 years ago, some Europeans, French most particular, Hubert Védrine was their famous foreign minister, were dreaming and pushing for a multipolar world as soon as it is possible. Now, once we are swimming into, they are totally unprepared, those promoters. And that's, of course, a kind of a problem of Europe. I do not have, I grew up from the community of human rights freedom fighters, and I'm proud of this, and I think we should continue, for example, to fight for freedom, because without the freedom we wouldn't have nothing. At the same time, there is some shift. In the economy, you have the circles, these Kondratev circles, booms, recessions, booms, recessions. And even in the international arena, you have eras which are more marked by global cooperation, great spirit, playing according to the rules. That's what we had these last 35 years. It was like downhill skiing on the blue course, for the beginners like myself. It's easy skiing. But then you have also the eras where, the power in economy, in military plays a larger role. And we are swimming into this era. I'm not dancing with the happiness, because the countries like mine are always feeling better in the rule-based world than in the world of the jungle, where the force, power plays a decisive role. But in particular in this transformative era, despite the fact that US, and maybe, again, we may like it or dislike it, but has reached the conclusion, and anybody who's reading their doctrinal documents, the papers, it's clearly said that the US are no more ready to work as a firefighter of everything. That China rise, India rise, Indonesia, Brazil, others. That simply you are still a power number one, and you would want to keep it, but you are not capable of fixing everything in the world, and that you will be selective, that you will be selecting your priorities and acting more according to national interest. And I think this is the basis, at least way I would recommend to work with you, because even in this era we are entering in, I think we have many, many serious arguments and common interests to work together. I mean, to keep the transatlantic community strong. And here I have to tell you that to have a Mark Rutte as a NATO Secretary General is a kind of a blessing. If I can imagine anybody else who was competing for the job in Europe, even those nice women like Kaya, the blessing is that Mark Rutte is in command, because he understood what this is about, and he has the ability to communicate this openly to the Americans and to the Europeans. The problem is also in Europe, because Europe is a child of this rule-based system. Here, internal structure of the EU is, to play according to the rules, to find the compromises. It takes a time. And usually the outcome is neither black or white, it's a gray. And it's a handicap in the world in which we are swimming in, because the US, China, India, not speaking about Russia, they are able to navigate and move and act in a much faster way than the Europeans. And the trap is that, there are some in Europe who are dreaming, to transform EU into kind of an empire. But, it's such a diversified continent that all those attempts in the past has resulted in the internal destruction. So we need to do it smartly. We should do this in a cooperation with the US. But if this cooperation has to survive, it must be on the mutual interest, not just rely that our mistakes are gonna to be fixed again in Washington. And this is a puzzle which must be fixed, must be solved. It's uneasy because Europeans are just waking up. It's slow. So it's important that they would know what is really important in this game. Defense spending is certainly a key issue, and you have to openly say this to our European colleagues. Because this tendency, to play according to the role of Joseph Schweik, this famous good soldier Schweik, is very strong, not in Czech Republic, in Spain, even in Germany. So, we need to be much more open towards and much more serious if the common transatlantic business has to survive. Katka, show me that my time is gone. So my time is gone. So once again, welcome everybody who's here, in particular our American guests, and the show is yours. Thank you very much.
So good afternoon, everybody. I would like to ask my panelists actually to come to the stage because we are starting our panel. All right. So, thanks again for coming. We have a collection of 4 extremely interesting people who are going to discuss where we are when it comes to transatlantic relationship 1 year after President Trump's second inauguration. So the purpose of this panel is taking stock of the transatlantic relationship in January and February 2026. We will be discussing where we are, what needs to be done, what is the true state of cooperation in defense and security between the United States and Europe. And I have, as I said, I have 4 extremely distinguished speakers with us, and I'm sure that it will be a delightful discussion. Let me first very briefly introduce all the 4 of them. We have Paula Dobransky. She's senior vice chair at Scowcroft Center at the Atlantic Council. She used to be the Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs. Then we have Dan Fried. Dan is a distinguished fellow with the Atlantic Council as well, and he used to be a U.S. ambassador to the Republic of Poland, plus a lot of other positions. Then we have Jim Carafano from the Heritage Foundation and a senior counselor to the president of the Heritage Foundation. Yes. And we have Kaush Arha, who is the president at the Free and Open Indo-Pacific Forum and a senior fellow at the Pepperdine Institute for Diplomacy, Security and Innovation. So as you can see, actually we needed to make some slight changes when it comes to the composition of this panel. Some people were not able to make it due to all kinds of traffic disturbances, so I'm very grateful that actually we were able to rearrange the panel and that we have this specific collection of speakers with us. First, let me ask our 4 panelists to tell us what they think about the current status and the perspectives of the transatlantic relationship, about the future of NATO, what needs to be done, what Europeans should be doing, how Europeans should react to what's coming from Washington, what should be ideally the new division of labor between Americans and Europeans within NATO, what should be the new balance of responsibilities for European defense within NATO, all these things that actually we have been discussing in Europe and in European capitals for some time. And we all know that actually, and we have known it for years, that the transatlantic relationship and NATO must be adjusted for a new era. So I would like to ask our four panelists actually to contribute what they deem important when it comes to making the transatlantic cooperation in defense and security and NATO relevant for the 2020s and 2030s. Paula, please, floor is yours.
Right. Well, first, when I hear that list, we've been asked to speak for 5 minutes. So I first would like to indicate how delighted and privileged I feel to be here. I am vice chair of the Scowcroft Center at the Atlantic Council, and I mention that because we're very pleased to join the sponsors and focusing on Central Europe Week. You matter, what happens in this region, your views, the trends really matter, and it's I think been important to have your voice in this. I want to make a few points, a few very brief points, but not so much a focus on NATO up front, I'll come back, but on the recent national security strategy and defense strategy document released by the Trump administration. Because I think there have been things that have been said and that I think what hasn't been focused on should be focused on, which goes to the core of the question here today. And that question is that we know that the, if you will, engagement in terms of engagement has shifted, but the question is, what are the opportunities? I wouldn't only focus on what are the challenges, there are many, and there always have been, but what are the opportunities? And that's how I'd like to begin. The first is, I would start by saying that I think it underscores that our bilateral relationship with you, with the neighborhood, matters greatly. You are strategic partners as part of the NATO alliance, as part of that structure, and just in your own right. You are strategic partners, and that remains as such. And by the way, it's rooted in a range of issues: economic, political, military, security issues. So this region and you matter. The second is, in the actual national security document, actually the language is that a strong Europe is America's best partner. So the issue over defense and NATO, by the way, is rooted in that. Think about it. If you don't all contribute in terms of the same amount, well, how strong is Europe? How strong is the deterrent, collective deterrent will we have? If only a few countries do and not all, that's problematic. And in this case, there was also the language in the document: the United States is strategically and culturally vested in Europe. It is. It is in this case and continues to remain so. So what are the areas that we care about? Certainly with your recent elections, I would say that it's been said, and by a number of you saying informally and then formally, that there's a real focus on domestic issues. By the way, I would say, you know the term America First. By the way, when Trump came in and he was voted in the first time and the second time, there was a very important focus on looking at what needed to be changed in terms of economics in the United States. But that did not mean to the exclusion of also what matters internationally. So in this case, I would say that there are a range of issues that we should be partnering on. Ukraine, of course, because what happens in Ukraine has ramifications not only for you, for us, but by the way, countries like Japan have upped their defense spending. They're very concerned about the consequences of what results in Ukraine for the Indo-Pacific. It's a fact. It's not even just a general concept. Trade has shifted in different ways. The United States does have trade with China, but also Trump has laid down very significant markers, even very recently, about the importance of minerals and the concern about Chinese dominance over minerals and the steps that we could be taking. And this is another area, energy. Energy and energy independence. I'd use those words. So I'm citing areas that we should be collaborating on. It doesn't mean that the paths have to be identical, but they should be mutually reinforcing. Let me mention two last things, and I'm going to actually sum up. I do want to mention 4 key areas that are highlighted in the National Security Strategy document and defense document that actually matter to you and us, and we're already focused on it, certainly in a broad NATO context and in a defense context. One is restoring supply chains. We've learned, certainly from the pandemic and what took place during the pandemic. Securing critical technologies. There are so many developments in Europe these days, and this is a key area for both of us and provides an opportunity. Rebuilding the domestic industrial capacity. We know that's crucial. The defense industrial production, and also the whole issue of controlling mineral flows. President Trump just brought into the Oval Office a number of CEOs, a number of others, cabinet members who are engaged in that whole issue about minerals. There are geopolitical challenges, and I would simply say that rules of engagement have shifted, but in my book, there are so many opportunities here, many opportunities. And let me mention one in closing. You know, I know when I worked in the Reagan administration at the White House and the National Security Council, I remember, by the way, we looked to the Czech Republic and even beyond, and those dissidents who were part of Charter 77 at the time and beyond for their connections with dissidents across the globe. And I think in particular of Cuba. I mentioned to Thomas Pojar, who's very involved with that issue, of it's the Czech government that was engaged with many dissidents in Cuba. We worked through you. And why do I raise that? Well, you know, Venezuela, there is a shift that's taken place there and will continue to take place there, which has direct ramifications for Cuba. So there are many issues, and even though there might be a strong domestic agenda, that doesn't mean that your domestic agenda isn't going to be affected internationally. They're interwoven. So I'll end by simply saying, I actually see this particular title, A Year Later, America, Europe, and the World. It's a time of change, but it's a great time of opportunity, and that's what I think as an agenda together we should be looking at. And I'm looking forward to contributing more to this particular point.
Well, thank you very much, Paula. Very useful, and especially thank you for focusing on the opportunities. I think it's very important to not actually ignore that together with all kinds of challenges and problems, we have a lot of opportunities as well. Dan Fried, please, floor is yours. I'm eager to hear your 5-minute opening remarks. Thank you.
Ask yourselves where we want to be, Europe and the United States, when we get through whatever it is we're going through right now. And where we want to be is a stronger transatlantic alliance based on a stronger Europe that is standing up and doing more for its own defense, and a more equal partnership, a stronger European capacity, a stronger European voice, but a transatlantic relationship. If you add up the collective strength of the non-US members of NATO, plus Canada, plus the Asian democracies, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Australia, New Zealand, that's a powerful free world core of nations. With the United States, that has the military, industrial, technological potential to be top dog and contend with our authoritarian adversaries. The Trump administration has been pushing Europe to do more, and that isn't just Donald Trump. American presidents since Eisenhower have been complaining about Europe's inability to spend enough and develop enough military capacity, which is why when you hear the Americans saying that Czechia needs to do more and spend more on defense, this isn't just Donald Trump that is going to go away when Donald Trump leaves office. This is an American concern, and it extends across both parties. But the good news is, it seems to me that the Trump administration has won that argument with Europe, and European countries, European governments have generally signed up to spend more on defense. So if you look past and through some of the current noise and contention, I'm going to get to that. There is a transatlantic relationship that is solid on the other side. The Canadian Prime Minister made a powerful, moving speech at Davos that got a lot of attention. He said the rules-based order is dead. He blamed the Trump administration for killing it. Now, I take that as a cautionary note, but not a note of reality about where we are. And I think that European countries can find the right formula of working with the Americans and, when needed, pushing back on some of the bad ideas, like the annexation of Greenland, for which there is no excuse, and I'm not going to make one. However, in the Trump administration is not a single thing. No U.S. administration is ever a single thing, but the Trump administration is a more diverse coalition than most. And there are all kinds of people in it. And the Trump political coalition is an even more diverse coalition and contains Eurosceptics, Asia-firsters, isolationists, fortress Americas, all kinds of different groups representing basically every American school of strategic thought over the past 100 years, some of them better than others. But the strength of what I will call the Reaganites in the American right, in the Trump coalition, in the administration, should not be underestimated. In addition to the national security strategy, and Paul is right to point out some of the better elements of it, there was the National Defense Authorization Act that the Republicans pushed through Congress, which was very pro-European and put limits on the ability of any administration to pull troops out of Europe. What I'm saying is that European countries should not walk away or throw up their hands or complain about the United States. They should get down to work and work the issues the way Europeans have done with the United States for decades. Work, if you see a problem, work the problem, find allies, and step up to answer the very legitimate demands of the Trump administration that Europe do more. That gives countries who are doing more the license to go into Washington and work the issues. Americans can be a little much. The Trump administration can be quite a bit. And I'm not going to defend a lot of it. But to throw up your hands or declare an end? Really? Putin loves that. I wouldn't. So work the problem, and you will have friends across the political spectrum in Washington, from the Reagan Republicans to the Democrats who've rediscovered their inner Harry Truman. Work with us, and we will work back.
Well, thank you so much, Dan, for this very calm and rational approach, which I think is the right way of how actually do this. And many thanks, especially for touching upon the issue of NATO burden sharing and defense spending. I'm sure we will come back to that later. Jim Carafano, please.
Yeah, but first of all, this is an amazing crowd. This is more people than showed up for my wedding. I'm really Really. Matter of fact, you guys smile because I want my wife to see this. Right. We should applaud Servo that put this. It's amazing. So we should have a round of applause. Come on, for our hosts here. This is really incredible. This is awesome. Okay, Mr. Nice Guy is done. Look, quit your whining. There is only one real conventional threat to the peace and security of Europe, and that is Russia. And the reality is, today, as we sit here and speak, Europe has a greater, and the transatlantic community and NATO has a greater capacity to defend European soil than we had when I was here in the 1980s. You guys have nothing to complain about. You know, in the 80s, the front line was in the middle of Germany. So the day one of the war, we'd already lost because they were already almost to the Atlantic. You have much more strategic depth in Europe and that creates, not that we want to sacrifice any land, but that creates an enormous strategic operational challenge. The Russians have way more of a frontier to cover. With the addition of Swinland, because it's too hard to say Finland and Sweden, it's just easier to say Swinland. You know, we have thousands of more miles or kilometers of frontier that a whole northern flank that the Russians have to contend with, which is absolutely a strategically insurmountable problem for them. And then you have, in my mind, no offense to the Czech Republic, the three most important countries in NATO. One is Poland. We have a Poland which under a conservative government and under a liberal government is absolutely committed to a rearmament that puts a large modern army right in front of the Russians in the middle of Europe. That is an insurmountable object. And on their flank is the second most important country in NATO, and that is Ukraine. It doesn't matter if Ukraine is in NATO or not. Russia cannot attack anybody at NATO and just drive by Ukraine and say, oh yeah, we're on our way to Riga.
Should be targeted on this and that. Nobody understands this more than Ursula von der Leyen on both sides. It's cheap talk to say, let's go hit them. And hit them to do what? It's a much bigger thing to hit each other than our ability to hit China, which includes America. And we're not doing it. So let's not have sort of open, sort of loose talk in that end. On NATO, I mean, just exactly what Jim has mentioned. Our sensitivity to insecurity in Middle East and Indo-Pacific is very high. To have any idea that we would be that sensitive to have insecurity in Europe would be 10 times higher. So there's no scenario in which America would be more secure, MAGA or not, isolationist or not, in writing Europe up. So I think the interest level are really, really very strong, and no amount of rhetoric from our side would give it away. Then the question comes on exactly what Paula mentioned and something that Dan said. There are remarkable opportunities. You may not like Donald Trump's rhetoric, but his ability to change the world is pretty darn remarkable. There would not have been a 5% commitment but for Donald Trump, period. There may not be a lot of things. The Middle East would be substantially transformed but for Donald Trump. I mean, there are sort of remarkable things that happen. So can you either take those opportunities and go with it, or absolutely revel in everything that you think is tremendously offensive, which they are. I'm not, just like Dan, I'm not going to defend them, but it's something I can't do much about it. It's a little bit like me walking down the street, pointing towards big mansions and say, it's very ugly. If I had the money, I would change the house. I don't have the money. He was the man who got elected as the President of the United States, and he got elected primarily because people thought they liked the way he talked about things. In fact, most American voters say we like it because he says it as it is. The other important thing is if we go down this road, and Europe has a choice. We do have in our side not only a MAGA, but even a bipartisan, whether it's stated, unstated view, and it's very strong, that Europe is all talk without action. And you have to decide when we come here whether you are confirming this predisposed stereotype or you're changing it. In that kind of question, you have to again decide that would it be okay to lecture us about values and making President Trump more transactional. I would submit respectfully the Europe is 10 times more transactional, has been transactional throughout the entire history than America has. So we can talk about, and that talks about your dependency on Russia earlier on and energy issues when a lot of Eastern Europeans said don't do it. That depends on whether you want to give Ukraine earlier on NATO membership or not. That depends on your engagement with China even today. So I think the notion of some of these things, we can also talk about trust. Wherever you get and say, well, America can be trusted or not given on this thing. Again, it depends on how you define it. We can make a case that we've been asking for greater support from Europe and commitment to its own defense since Eisenhower, and hasn't happened. Who can trust who, where the trust deficit is? It can play both ways. So either we can spend a lot of time on values, transactions, trust, lack of trust, or look at critical national interest for both of us where we have a lot of room to make. Energy was mentioned, defense was mentioned, and then look at the both documents. Either is NSS, which has got some very cuckoo things in it, NDS, which is a little bit more straightforward. And NDS sees a world in which American allies have the ability to have conventional deterrence to their primary adversaries. Europe having conventional deterrence towards Russia, South Korea having conventional deterrence towards North Korea, and Middle East being able to handle it on the Iran concept. It just says that is the objective. If the world at the end of Donald Trump was in that position, the world would be a lot safer, a lot more robust than it is today. It mentions nowhere that we are abrogating either our nuclear deterrence behind that or our intelligence sharing or our logistic support. In fact, it says we shall do that and continue to do it. Furthermore, it goes specifically to say about defense industrial base, not only in America, but in coordination with allies. These are just explicit words from the NDS. Now, having said that, it also needs to be acknowledged that we also need to do a lot of introspection. One, every administration in America, whether it be Democrat or Republican, when we get in power, and I had the pleasure to serve 3 of them, we think the world started the day we took our oath. Before that, it didn't start. So that is something we are all afflicted with when we go forward. Second, even on paper we are talking about alliances. We're certainly not using the language which would build alliances. We had learned to better treat our allies than we are doing right now. But having said all that, you have the choice whether you're going to follow a principled pragmatism of looking at especially national interest, doubling down and bettering it, which I think can be done, most likely would be done, or you give claps to a cheap thrills of Mr. Carney to talk about rupture. There ain't no language of rupture in American side, with nothing to talk about but strengthening this or getting. So that's the choice as we go forward, and I would like to spend time more talking about the opportunities that people talked about. Thank you very much.
Well, excellent. Many thanks, Gaush. Some useful stuff. Also, many thanks for actually reminding us that we shouldn't be such snowflakes when listening to President Trump. Well, so we have got a healthy dose of principled pragmatism from all the speakers. I'm grateful for that. And let me start with asking a first question and going back to some of what you have said. There are now a lot of people in Europe and also in Canada, obviously, arguing that we should strive from decoupling ourselves as fast as possible from the United States in finance, defense, technologies, trade, that there should be some kind of break with the United States so that actually we are no longer dependent on the United States in all these areas I have mentioned. So what would you say? Is it a sound approach on the part of Europe to try to decouple from the United States as fast as possible? Dan, or Paula?
I think that question has been well answered already. In fact, if I may, I think Dan answered it in his opening remarks. And actually, all of us did, in different ways, answer that question. The fact is balance here. It is in our interest, it's in your interest in terms of deterrence and the deterrent value here to look at what economically, politically, economically is the right way and the strongest way forward. Not just only for you, but also for the transatlantic relationship. And it's very interwoven. I brought in the Indo-Pacific because what does happen here with Ukraine 100% affects what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. So the answer is a balance. There are already shifts taking place in terms of trade. There are shifts in the energy space. I do want to say this, though, on this issue. I wouldn't use the word decoupling, but on the issue of NATO, and I want to weave that in because I didn't in my opening remarks, I understand that here now in the Czech Republic there's a discussion and there's a debate about what the defense budget should be. If that's not the case, great. But let me say this, that out of the last very successful NATO meeting that took place in The Hague, and I'd agree Sasha Vondra is right in terms of Mark Rutte and his leadership, here there was an outcome of a commitment towards 5%. Poland's in the lead on this, beyond any other country. Estonia and the United States are behind you and strongly there. But which country stepped aside? That was Spain. Spain only said that it would possibly do the 2%. I just would say that whatever the debate is here in this country, please look at it. You are in the heart of Europe, and you are looked to. And in this case, yes, there isn't decoupling. You should go the path that is right for not just your security, but the security of the region as a whole. Jim mentioned the Russian threat. That's not going away. And that's not going away also just even with regard to Ukraine. So simply put, I wouldn't use that term. I think I would use the term that most countries do find their path, as has always been the case. But here there are certain matters that have to be constant. And you really answered it in your opening remarks, in my opinion.
The European countries need to take a deep breath and distinguish between the flamboyant and occasionally destructive rhetoric of President Trump and his erratic use of tariffs and the underlying economic and technological ties that bind us together. How much is lasting? Distinguish between short-term pushback and long-term issues. Now, no doubt, if I were writing talking points for a French competitor of American aerospace or defense companies, I would fill it with stuff about the American unreliability and to try to get this deal or that deal. But there is a big difference between the short-term turbulence and longer-term decoupling. And notice that Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney talks about a rupture and then he reaches out to China. So you don't like Trump because he's insufficiently supportive of the free world and the rules-based order, but Xi is? Really? Don't make long-term strategic decisions based on an American administration which is right in the here and now. But that's not saying that Europe shouldn't push back when the Trump administration crosses the line from rhetoric to actual threats. Denmark, Greenland. Okay? So I'm not arguing that Europe just take it. Europe pushes back, but don't overlearn lessons and then make long-term decisions based on short-term problems.
Footnote. I disagree a little bit with what Dan just said on tariffs. I do want to say this. If you look at the data, and because I actually was quite interested in looking at this, let's say, and this is now just in the European market, if you look at the data on what American cards are charged to come into Europe and what it is for cars from Germany and elsewhere into the States, it has not been even-handed. The taxes on U.S. cars coming in here have been very high. And so, candidly speaking, that's where that comes into play, is about leveling that, because the American public, in this case, have really, it's not isolationist, actually, it's very focused on these issues. And what does that mean for our businesses? What does that mean for our own access?
Fair enough. And plus, I'll generalize from Paula's point to say there's nobody pure in this, and nobody should claim to be. Right.
Coach.
Okay. What's the right way to respond, again, is how Ursula von der Leyen has. Went and signed Mercosur deal, signed the India deal, she's going to Australia. That's the right way to respond. The wrong way to respond is to say you would decouple. I know you cannot. You do not want to say to me things which reinforce your impetus to me. You can say you're going to decouple. You can decouple with Russia, for God's sake. You cannot decouple with China. You want to tell me you're going to decouple with me? You can, and then if he gets you a cheap laugh at Davos, have at it. But if without that, but you are confirming. So again, this is very important. If Mr. Carney had gone up and said, it's very important, middle power, I am going to not only Spain, but Canada has not done 5% either. Mr. Trudeau said, I'll do 2% in 2032. So this sort of an absolute incredible nature, and then give lecture on rupture and going to China. And unlike Europe, Canada knows that we will always take care of their defense because they're so intertwined. Canada also knows there is no way in hell China is coming into Canadian economy and that economy part of USMCA. So the speech was literally a classic example of a venting in a very irresponsible manner. And it reinforced among the non-Euro Atlanticists in America who are skeptical about Euro that this is what Europe stands for. They go to Davos and they give claps on each other on something. So what I would suggest respectfully, back to the principle, that there are real issues like your trade agreements, other stuff that you can do, which you should do. You know, if you really want to go to Draghi report, if you really want to make it, then yes, have a unified European capital market. That is one way to go forward. But don't come around and tell me that you're going to decouple. You can't decouple in my lifetime. More you talk about it, more incredible you look to me. So those are the stuff. And then you have to decide whether we really want to come together. And let's just take all the words out. So, is Europe's strategic autonomy stronger with American alliance, strong alliance in dealing with China, in dealing with India, in dealing with Russia, or is it a higher strategic autonomy on its own? I would say it's lower. Every country that is strongest ally with America, their strategic alliance is higher. Take Israel, take UK, take Japan. So again, let's talk about it in a way that builds and take aware of the opportunities that Paula and Dan talked about.
Jim, any comments?
No, I would like to go back to this point that the decoupling argument plays extremely poorly in the U.S. And the more you say it, the more America actually thinks you look less credible and laughs at you in this administration. So it actually is having the opposite effect of what people think it is. Strategic autonomy is not, I can do whatever I want. That's called a teenager. Strategic autonomy is taking responsibility for the decisions that you make and making the best decisions for your people. And I want to go back to the defense point, if I could, because I do think this is a really crucial issue for the Czech Republic. Because if we realize that whatever you want, we need more conventional defense capability in Europe. Mic drop. Stop. There's no scenario where that isn't. That is the insurance policy that Europe will be free, safe, and whole for another generation. That is not an optional choice. So for the Czech Republic, which is a small country, but it is like almost any other small country in Europe, is that the Czech Republic has traditionally been a nation that defines what a responsible small country is. Now, for Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia, what's the lesson of the Ukraine war? Which is, if you want people to come to your aid, if you want collective defense to work, then what you better be damn well to do is defend your country on day one. If Ukraine had not defended itself on day one, Europe would not have come to its defense, and if Europe did, the United States would not have, right? Lithuania and Latvia may not be able to beat Russia, but they know if they could fight at least for a week, the rest of us will get our act together and we'll be there. So actually, the most fundamental thing in collective defense is demonstrating the capacity to contribute to your own defense. It is not this future where Ukraine, the Czech Republic makes the buttons and the Slovak makes the wheels and the Germans make the tires. Every nation in Europe should have a demonstrable self-defense capability. That is your badge of honor in collective defense. And from a standpoint of being a good member of Europe, if the Czech Republic, which has been the leader and the virtue signaler of what does a responsible nation do, if they can't honor a pledge that they made, what does that say to the rest of Europe? What does that say to the defense commitment of Europe? This is not Spain. The guy that runs Spain is a criminal communist, and Spain is at the far end of the earth, and they're never going to take Rota away from us, right? So that is a Yahoo state. And the notion that the Czech Republic would ever want to compete with Spain for the title of the Yahoo state is nonsense. And I understand the argument that, look, we have a lot in common with Americans. We value a lot of the same things, and that is absolutely true. But the United States values those things, and they value collective defense as well. And you could say, well, we want to take care of our people. We want to spend a lot more money on our social welfare systems and other things because our people deserve that. That's money for it. You know who else could say that? The United States of America could say that. Donald Trump had to go to the American people and say, I'm going to find a way to spend on defense, and I'll figure out how to make the country more successful and prosperous as well. So if you think you're going to get a sympathetic ear from the President of the United States, say, well, I'd like to spend more money on defense, but I'm going to spend it on social welfare spending, but I don't know what you Americans are going to do. That's just not going to work. This is a moment of choosing for this country. And you can make, I think, to my friends in the audience, a valid argument that maybe the last government didn't, in terms of getting an on-ramp to defense spending, didn't leave you off in the best place. I'm not. That's up to you guys. But the point is the past is in the past. You are where you are today, and there is only one path for the Czech Republic if you want to be seen in the eyes of the United States as not just a responsible partner for the United States, but it is exemplar for the kind of European nations that we honor and respect. Then you need to move in the right direction.
Amen to that. Dan?
Do a footnote to this, because I'm in agreement, okay? Well, I'll reserve the comments about the Spanish government. That's another issue. But look, there's also a...
So just to be clear, Dan doesn't like Trump, but he likes the Spanish government. No.
The Trump administration, as I said before, but I'm going to double down on that, is a, let us say, dynamic organization, which is another way of saying that your decisions can have an impact on it. Now, let's take a real-world example. There are a lot of people in the Trump administration who don't like NATO, and they have said so. And I'm not going to name them, but we know who they are.
Stephen Miller. Oh, sorry.
There are others. But what did the U.S. ambassador, what did Ambassador Whitaker manage to do with the NATO summit? He used Trump's initially dismissed demand for 5%, turned it into real pledges, got a win, and then got Trump to accept having won the argument and embracing NATO. You don't like all of the rhetoric coming from the United States about allies, and I would agree with you. But we're in a much better place than we might have been. And that's because Europeans worked with the people in the Trump administration who were Atlanticists and made it work out. There was another debate. We were in Romania earlier this week. The Romanians are unhappy because the U.S. withdrew militarily some forces from Romania, which was a bad call. I didn't like it. I'm not going to defend it. But I'm old enough to be able to reverse engineer that discussion inside the Trump administration, and I am reasonably confident that what was chosen was the mildest of a range of options which started out with something really bad. Why did it not end up badly? Because countries like Poland had invested a hell of a lot into defense, and some of the people in the Trump administration or in Trump world more broadly were able to say, what are you doing? Take the win. If you've got Europeans doing what we've asked Europeans to do, don't pull out of Europe. That argument largely prevailed. If you look at the range of options and reverse engineer the discussion in the Trump administration, I'm fairly confident in saying that it came out about 85 to 90% the right way, which is another way of saying that what Europe doesn't have to be a passive spectator. Get in and work the problem, and find the people in the administration and people in Congress who are of like mind, and make it work. I'm looking at Sacha Vondra. Do you think, and Michael Jantovsky, remember how the Clinton administration started out on NATO membership for Czechia? Like, never. Go away. Shut up. But you didn't, did you? You got in there and you worked the problem along with the Poles. Havel and Wałęsa beat up Clinton, and they won. They won. The Trump administration is different, but it's not so radically different. Get in there and work the problem, and get in on the basis of doing more. Okay? You know, I'm not part of Trump world. I'm not going to pretend to be. But that doesn't matter. Whether you like it or not, go in there and work the problem and do what you have to do. And then you will find friends in all kinds of places. So, you know,
If I can just support what Dan is saying, which again, it started off two things, just on the example of Romania and on Poland. Poland, a similar withdrawal was done. Polish president came to Trump, they met, he reversed the withdrawal of taking of troops. The Romanian president hasn't done that yet in a meeting. If he did, it's very likely that 370 people may be back into Romania. Dan started by saying a very important thing, that in Trump world, you have more or less every ideology you can possibly ask, the isolationist, they're all vying for his view. You have to decide, the more rhetorical nonsense and red herrings you choose, you are strengthening the non-Atlanticist in Trump world. The only way to deal in this particular administration, and the first one where I was in, there really is no substitute to dealing with the president himself directly with the leader. There are none. A meeting with Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, NSA, doesn't count. So you have to engage with him. But when you engage with him, back to Paula's point of opportunities, now it's really dependent on how persuasive you are, what's the rapport, what's the deal, what's the big, bold deal you can present on the table, and then he may react to that. And you actually have a big advantage. Because normally a president, you go up, you get briefed up by NSS, and all of us say, you know, you can't give so much to Czechia. You can't really give it to Poland. Here are all the landmines, and here are some things you need to watch for, and all the people with President, he now decides whatever he decides is the way it would go. So it really is an opportunity to engage with him directly on everything that you talked about, that actually we are better off in that situation than meeting with Obama or Biden, because you'll have a whole staff telling them what you cannot do, and there's a whole meetings beforehand which have teed up the things, and then you go and meet him. And if you did it, you can really come up with better stuff than you ever thought about. And that is really, really important to keep in mind as you engage, and you again have a choice, and this choice is important. I would also say it is not that bad to be dead with that complacency, because it's that complacency of being polite and not raising issues is why we find ourselves where we are today. to in some degree President Trump, even if he's giving us a very bitter medicine, in hindsight, as I said, after end of 3 years, if we find ourselves with a conventional deterrence in Europe, in South Korea, and in Middle East, we may remember either for all the barbs that came from President Trump, or history would say, hey, after this, we were stronger for it. I don't know, but it's certainly not given yet that the end of the world has come. I would say if I had any chances to put, I would pick better bets that will come out stronger from it.
I'm going to jump in just a footnote. Thank you for reinforcing on opportunity. I think each and every one of us in our own statements here have done so. The point is to stop focusing on, dwelling on issues that really, in the end, don't advance the agenda. And I think here it's misguided dwelling. Instead, focus on those shifts, those changes that have taken place, because they're rather strategic. And on decoupling, I think you've heard from each of us, the answer is no. That's a wrong path to go. I want to put it back up in a geostrategic place, because I know, Thomas Poyer, you're moderating the next panel, and that's going to focus on Russia, China. It's worth reminding ourselves, by the way, if you look at the relationship between Russia and China, and particularly the stances that have been taken on Ukraine, China's reinforcement of Russia in this case, the fact of the matter is that one of the primary goals which has brought the two of them together certainly was the target of the United States and our standing globally, but the second is our allies, our partners, our friends. There's always been a target and a desire to fragment us. So decoupling, I think, is not in the collective defense interest of any of us who do have basic common goals and objectives.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much to all of you for answering my question in such a clear and persuasive way. You, of course, know that this decoupling argument has been all over the European media recently, and that's why actually we needed to address it. And I'm very grateful that you addressed that in such clear terms. So to conclude, because the time is up, to conclude from what you have said, essentially it's pretty clear and it's very relevant for this very country, that we Europeans and Czechs can be our own worst enemies if we focus on the wrong things, if we don't deliver what we promised, if we don't do our homework when it comes to our contribution to collective defense in NATO, if we don't live up to our commitments we made at NATO, and if actually we don't live up to our commitments, we will only make life for NATO haters and people who are opposed to continued transatlantic cooperation in the United States, within the administration. We will help them, essentially. We will undermine our own position and our own security. So it always starts with our own contribution and our own homework. So thank you, all of you, for making this absolutely clear. And that's how we concluded this panel. Thank you so much.